My guest is Dan Afnon. He's a director of the Fetterman School of Public Policy and Government. Welcome back to the show, Dan.
Thank you.
An old friend. It's nice to see you.
It's been 12 years since I appeared on your show.
Really?
I think so. It was 1998.
The
Yes.
first year you were on.
I remember you gave me a mug at the end.
That's right.
And I have high expectations today.
We don't give out those mugs. Sorry.
Well,
Anyway, we're in Jerusalem. We couldn't
I'll
drink
stay.
beer.
I'll stay.
You'll
okay.
stay anyway.
I'll give you a mug.
Okay, good deal. Now, I want you to talk about democracy, because that's one of your big issues in democracy. And I want you to briefly give me a sense of democracy as you see it in Israel today.
Well, I see in democracy in Israel, the one word is a challenge. It's not a thing that you can clearly define. We are a parliamentary democracy. When we go through the motions of a democracy in the formal sense. We go to elections maybe too often. We have governments that function under the conventions of parliamentary democracy, but we have a very thin democratic consciousness. We are not, when I say we, I mean the basic cultures that comprise Israeli society.
All of the cultures?
Not
Arab,
all
Jewish,
of them.
Religious, or?
You know, we're 62 years into this experiment in our people's history, and I'm only now, I'm not 60 yet, but I've been around. I grew up here. And I'm beginning to realize only now how significant are the roots of the countries of origin, including if you grew up here on this land, prior to the establishment of the state. The strongest Democrats are those that came from Anglo-American countries, the British, the Canadian, the Americans, to a lesser degree Australians, in terms of where you see it in NGOs, you see promoting, and they could be right and left wing. But an understanding of what the democracy should be and what is and isn't done under these circumstances comes from pre-Israel backgrounds, from host or from origin societies. I would say we Jews, do not come as a culture with a democratic background.
No, I mean, it's quite clear the biblical background isn't to promote democracy.
I want to say something sharper than that.
Okay.
The biblical, people do not realize something that I'm working on in research now, the power of the weekly readings. Imagine in Hebrew, our mother tongue is Israeli Hebrew. Our ancient tongue is biblical Hebrew. They are the same words, but in the Bible they have one context, and in modern Hebrew another.
But there's no ancient Hebrew word for democracy, is there?
No, it's interesting that there isn't a word in Hebrew for democracy. We say demokratia, coming from the kind of origin in the other language. But let's say the word citizen, which is basic to state and is the basic unit of a democratic state. It's a word that comes from the Bible that originally, when you read the biblical text, it differentiated an Israeli as pure Israelite from others. Now you know that citizens is about equality. Now I think that there's something in our collective consciousness, in our mind, as Jews, that keeps us separate from those who are not Jews. We brought that into our democratic culture. And that's a difficulty that we have to overcome if we want to be a consciousness democracy, not just a formal democracy. There are many points in our political history where you see people who are decent, who love human beings, who are basically for justice on the simplest terms, suddenly get all tied up because there's something in our Jewishness which is a bit scared, which is a bit anxious, which is a bit not accepting what is perceived as threat just by others. And this is something that in our next 62 years we'll have to work on, which is to let go and be democratic in terms of human sharing this planet, not only fighting over its boundaries.
But I define democracy not as majority rule, but as respect for otherness, and particularly of minorities. And it's very important for a democracy to give equality to all citizens and to respect the minority cultures and minority beliefs, etc., of the diversity of the population. Now, to some degree, Israel certainly does that. But where does it fall short? What are the key areas?
Well, in a short interview, you need illustrative examples. The easiest one, particularly for a Canadian, is that we have a constitution that is evolving. We don't have a formal constitution, but a constitution that is being legislated through a series of basic laws. Equality is not legislated in our constitutional laws because it could not be agreed upon. It could not be, the word equality does not appear in our evolving constitution because it would imply precisely the attitude that you have just projected. It would imply to take it seriously. It would imply that there are certain things that are basic rights equal before law for each and every citizen. But we are Jewish citizens and non-Jewish citizens. The issue of equality is a catchword behind which there are a lot of grievances and imbalances, injustices done by what? By the Jewish majority in relation to non-Jewish minorities as groups and as individuals. Now this is, we are a democracy and a state in formation. We're evolving. We may evolve towards a democratic society and state. We may evolve to something yet more ethnic and less democratic.
But that's what I want to ask, is what's the trajectory as you see it? What has been the trajectory, particularly this current recent time, and how do you see it going? Which direction? I mean, let's maybe not ask the last question because that requires prediction. But where's the trend line?
There are two factors that will determine everything. One is demography, the fact that more and more kids in Israel come from non-Zionist, non-secular, and hence non-liberal democratic cultures. The
So
majority.
This is both Arabic and religious
Yes,
Jewish.
over 50% of first grade kids are from Arab or ultra-Orthodox families, and 50% are either from Arab and national religious, altogether 75%. Now, not all of them are non-democratic, of course. A large proportion of Arabs and Jews who are religious are democratic and enjoy the benefits of that system of government, but there's a very strong core of non-democratic values within that population. So that's number one. And if I go on that trajectory, we will not be democratic in around 20 years, because there will be a dialectical process whereby we will be more and more authoritarian and autocratic. That's my projection. The other thing which will impact that is, of course, the question of the boundaries. If we secure peace agreements with our neighbors, this will change everything. This will change everything, because this open-endedness, we do not have external boundaries. Since 1948, we're not a defined entity. And we don't have an internal boundary because we don't have a constitution. So we lack boundaries. And if we create a boundary, this will impact the demographic issue, because we're clear who we are. Here we are. These are the boundaries. Inside Israelis, outside others. Today it's open-ended. So
You're not sure
I'm not
where it's
projecting,
going.
I'm just analyzing.
No, I understand. It avoids you getting punished and spanked. See, you did it wrong. You said it wrong. Okay, if I ask you one last brief question. What is the most critical area that threatens democracy, not the long-term demographic trend lines or the boundary issues, which are big issues, but in a more common sense? Because I have a sense, and I'll tell you the hypothesis, and it came out of this meeting with young Israelis, that they're getting the idea that Israelis need to learn civility. And I take that as critical to democracy. And it's one of Israel's great in all kinds of areas. It's a weak area. And I would want to know what you think is the weakest area in a more modest way.
I'll tell you something. I agree with you, so I will say something else. I think that what we do not address is the extent of anxiety caused by traumas accumulated over the past 100 years, not 60. This country has an inordinate number of traumatized individuals and groups, Jews, Arabs, immigrants, refugees, whatnot. And as history progresses, violent history, history whereby people close into their group identities, into their individual fears, we become less and less respectful of other people's fears, other people's hurts, other people's anxieties. We want to be open, but we're really scared. So if you ask me what our biggest challenge is to go to our fears, to air them out. Jews, Arabs, immigrants, refugees, foreign workers, the whole bundle of hurt that we have here, open that up that would give me hope that something could happen. Otherwise,
with that, we'll end. Thank you very much.
sure.